Good afternoon, dear Rabbi Sai, dear Chabura. Kol Torah Kol Alive. As we go through the entire Balpah with the Rambam and our lead, one Perek a day. And we are about to launch into the halachas of Tzitzis. And this is one of the mitzvahs that the Rambam includes in Sefer Ava. Sefer Ava are the mitzvahs that we have continuously on us to remind us of the love, our love for the Eibishter's love for us. And Tzitzis remind us, in addition to our commitment to the Eibishter, they remind us all the time mitzvahs, as we know, as Rambam is going to go through at the end of the whole series. So let's jump in. The Rambam begins. It's one positive biblical command to prepare tzitzis and tie them onto the corners of our garments. We're going to explain it in the following program. Halacha Aleph. Onav sha'oisin al knafa beged mimina beged. When you take an onaf literally means a branch. And the reason we're calling it a branch is that afterwards it's going to branch out into small threads. This entire unit is called an onaf. So when a person has an onaf and it's mimina beged, it's made of the same material. For example, this is wool and this is wool. They're from the same material. That is called, in the Lashon HaTorah, hu hanikra tzitzis. It's like the fringes on the side of one's head. And therefore, this is like the fringe, the side of the beged. And the Navi says, now, why are we going to refer to it in the future? We're going to refer to it as lavan, and then on it is going to be another mitzvah called tchelas. When we refer to this as the lavan threads or strings, it's not because it has to be lavan, rather, we don't have a commandment to dye them as opposed to the tchelas string. Now, biblically, there's no amount of strings that should be here. Now, halacha base. Once you have this onaf, the Rambam is going with a klal ala prat. So once you have, he's talking about this generic corner, which he calls an onaf, the root that has a whole bunch of fringes sticking out of it, strings. There's a second mitzvah to take a chut chelas, a blue, which is also a chut from that same, a string from that same material, and dye it blue. Doctor, and this actually should specifically be from wool. Shenitz b'kein rakia, which was dyed the color of the sky. And we wrap it around and string it around the root, the onaf. This whole corner. And this string that we string around it is called tchelas, the blue one. The amount of times it goes around, there's no shir min haTorah. Now, I want to point something out. First of all, I'm just going to preface this, even though I'm just going to zoom into this afterwards. But we take this entire corner, split it into three, and we try that the first third is what has the knots and the wraparounds, and then this hangs down. There has to be a part hanging down. When the Rambam says that the chut chelas goes around, it's referring to this part. And the amount of times it goes around, there's no minyan. However, as we're going to see, in the days that there was an understanding between all halachic authorities of what chelas is, which is the fish that we dye it from, that has that type of dye in it. So these wraparounds were made only from tchelas, besides the first one and the last one. As we'll see, they were from white, and we'll see the end is because, I'm just going to preface this, Rambam says it afterwards. The last one is white because Ma'alim B'Kodesh V'Loimer, it didn't mean that the first one you made was white, so you shouldn't end off on a lower note, kilu, and therefore you should end also Masal B'Mitzvah, you should end also with white. I was like, why did you start with white? Because that's Mimina Beged. To point out that it's the strings are from the same type of the beged and the same color. Afterwards, you wrapped around it blue, but be'etzem, the strings are from the same color of the beged. That's why we start with white. So, back to our discussion over here. Dr. Rambam. When we talk about the mitzvah of tzitzis, there are two commandments of the Eibishter. On the corner of your garment, you should have a root, what I'm going to call coming out of it with the strings hanging off it. And the second mitzvah is the shikroch ala onaf, on this root of tzitzis coming out of strings, you should wrap around a blue string. Shenemar, tzitzis. First, you make tzitzis, and that we said that's referring to that whole fringe group of tzitzis hanging out, and v'nosno al tzitzis hakanaf psil tchelas, on the tzitzis which is coming off the kanaf, off the corner of the garb, psil tchelas, a blue string. Now, tchelas ain't a makav is a lavan. One should know these are two separate mitzvahs. The tchelas does not withhold lavan. We don't have tchelas today, and we still make a perfect bracha al mitzvahs tzitzis or l'satim b'tzitzis without the tchelas, and vice versa. Lavan ain't a makav is a tchelas. Let's say he ripped the it's not kosher anymore, but he puts on it psil tchelas. Ketzad harei shein lo tchelas. You don't have tchelas. It's lavan lavade. V'chenim also lavan utchelas. V'nifsek alavan and ismait ad the kanaf. V'nisha tchelas lavade kosher. So if it ripped off the strings, and we're going to learn onward that if the string goes all the way back to the knot, to the extent that there's no kesher aniva hanging off, the amount that's needed to make a little slip knot, or it's a type of tie, aniva. If you don't have even that string is not considered. If there's no strings hanging down, it's not tzitzis. It's off the anaf, has to have fringes sticking out. So you don't have the white mitzvah, but you'll still have the mitzvah of tchelas. You could leave it. Now, even though we said that one does not withhold the second one, so do lavan or do tchelas, even if you don't have its counterpart. Einan shtei mitzvahs. Biblically, they fall under one mitzvah of el mitzvah say achas. The one positive command. That's what the Rambam began. It's one mitzvah say. Now, Amru Chachamim, v'hoyo lechem letzitzis. It should be for you as tzitzis, as the Torah says, Malamed, that even though the Torah commanded us on both of them, the lavan and the tchelas, the Torah concluded and said, v'hoyo lechem letzitzis. This combined will be the one mitzvah of tzitzis. Sheshnei mitzvah achas. Now, ba'arba tzitzis makva zu. However, this is the lavan and the tchelas. They're not making one another. But having all four corners of your beged, having each one of them should have proper tzitzis, that is makiv. So if you only have three, don't wear it. It's possible. If you wore a talis that either has white only, or blue only, or both of them, you're mekayim one mitzvah. Halach above. Keitzad oisin es hatzitzis. How does one do it? And now we're going to describe how one ties it onto the corner. Now, what I'm holding over here is a talis gadol that, in our case, unlike our talis katan, we actually have the shamish from which we do the wraparound, which in those days they would do the tchelas. Minhag Lubavitch is it has it in a separate string. Okay, it's interesting. Our tzitzis is slightly different. It hangs on an angle. See? Hangs on an angle and goes down to the middle. Very mahudr, between all the paiskim. But here, as you saw on the talis, the shamish string, the tchelas string, has a different hole separating it. Okay, so Al Ram is going to describe. Now, you go to the corner of the garment, which is the end of the woven part, okay? What the Rambam is excluding, don't include, sometimes you have extra strings hanging out. The measurement that he's about to give, that you should back up onto the beged to start sewing it on, back up from the end of what's woven. And move back away from the bottom and from the bottom this way. Not more than 3 etzbois. It should be within 3 etzbois, which we understand. Again, the Rambam holds etzbois is the width of the breadth of the thumb, and each one is 2 centimeters, so that's 6 centimeters, up to 6 centimeters. And and it should not be closer than kesher agudol. The way the Rambam is going to explain it, from the kesher agudol, from the knot. The knuckle of the thumb until the end of the nail. That's how close it should initially get to the end. It shouldn't be closer than that to the end of the beged. So the Indian is it should be al hakanaf, so tchelas, on the corner, not off the corner, and not hanging off the corner. So what happens is it has to be noitif al hakanaf. It's sewed on towards the end of the beged, which means not farther than 3 gudlin in. And it hangs onto the kanaf, but it can't be hanging mamish at the end. It has to be at least this far. The Alter Rebbe says it's 2 gudlin from the end. Okay. Not less than 3 it's boys, not more than 3 it's boys. Above, you put in 4 long strings and you put them through one hole. Okay, the arminig is put it through one hole and feed it out of the next. And then you have hanging down from both sides, 4 and 4. Each side has 4 because you folded that 4 into 2 is 8. Nimtzu shmoyne chutin mishulashin tluyin min hakeren. Now, the length of these 8 chutin ain't pachas me'arba etzba'is. It has to be not less than 4 etzba'is long. That means at least 1 etzba off the corner. And each etzba, like I said, is 2 centimeters. Even if it's an amma length of these threads off the corner, or 2 amas kshem and filkasher. All that's boys that we're mentioning, referring to, is the size of a good thumb. Now, so one of these 8 should be tchelas. How does that happen? If there are 4 chutin that you folded, if one of them is tchelas, then you'll have 6 of them white and 2 of them tchelas, right? Because it's each one is folded over. So the Rambam holds that the chut tchelas is dyed only one side tchelas. The other side, when it goes through the hole, that side should be lavan taka. Now, the loikea chut echad ben alavan. Now he's going to start discussing the times we go around the anaf. And he says, first you start, as I described earlier, you take a white chut, one of the white chutin, you wrap around one round. On the rest of the chutin, on the rest of the strings hanging down on that side of the beged. Then you let it go, and now you take over with the chut chelas. You do 2 of the blue ones right near the one white that you did, and you tie it. Now, when he says tying, it doesn't mean a knot yet. It just means you'll take it out and then takes the strings again and pull it through, like we have over here. You see the separations between them when you zoom in, Reb Levi. You see this chut lavan, it separates these krichos. It separates between them. They're called chulyos, these groups. So, yeah, you got it? Good. So then you continue making chulyos. We're going to call them groupings of only blue wraparounds. Then you make a third one until the last of the chulyos of this whole, the top third of the baguette of this group of strings. The final group of 3 should have 2 tchelas, and the last one should be lavan. Why? Because at the beginning, on the top of this, these chutin, you started with the first one being a chut lavan. So you should also end with the chut lavan. Why? You once you chose this, so then you have to consider white, the top one. Why taka did you start them with a lavan? So that's because that near the kanaf should be from its type. What we just described, that you do on one corner, that you duplicate that for the next 3 corners. Now, how many groups do you do on each side? Do not do less than 7, and not more than 13. Now, this is the mitzvah mufchar. The truth is, if you just did one group of tchelas going around, then you're good. And if you decided not to do it a third, rather you do the span of the majority of the tzitzis, and you left a good little hanging off, that's free, that's fringes, then it's also kosher. However, the most beautiful for the tzitzis should be, and of the tchelas, that all the chulyos should be in the third of these chutin that are hanging down. Shaloshin is, I think, is a nishtalshal, hanging down. Okay, and the next 2/3 should be the beged hanging down. One has to separate the tzitzis. Shouldn't be tangled and knotted into each other. It should be like as its namesake, tsara roish, that it's flowing. They're each one independent. Now, halacha tas. Ha'oisa lavan b'loy tchelis. If you did lavan like today's day and age, you don't have tchelis. You do have tchelis. Look, echad mishmoyne chutin. Take one of the 8 chutin. V'korich choysa al shara chutin ad shlishan. You do as we described to do with the chut tchelis. You do it with the chut lavan. Umaneach shtei shlishan anaf. And the last 2/3 you leave it just hanging down. A krichazu. And this wraparound in Ratzal Ikra Chulius Chulius Gain Shikar B'Tchelas, or Shos B'Yel, you want to do Chulius the same as we described to do with Tchelas. Great going. Vizel Minagenu. That is our minhag, says the Rambam. That's the minhag in Yemen. And V'im Ratzal Likra B'Loy Minyan Chulius. However, in this case, if you don't want to do Minyan Chulius because you're not doing the mitzvah of Tchelas, you oisa, that's also okay. Klal Shadavar, the rule of thumb, says the Rambam, Yiskaven Lias HaKaroch Shlish V'Anosh Shnei Shlishin. Again, try that the wraparound part that was surrounded with the shamer string, whether it's white or you were zoichen, it's with the tchelas. They should be 1/3 of the hanging down strings, and va'anaf, and what's free hanging, it should be another 2/3. There are people that hold that in the lavan, when you don't have tchelas, it's not such a akbada, that should be thirds, 1/3 this and 2/3 that. Even if you wrapped around the majority of the chutin, it will still be kosher. Halacha yud. Regardless of which one we're talking about, in you don't want it to be just one thread. It means one bunch of strings that you just stranded. You want to spin together a whole bunch of strings. That's in Ratzal Shizurin. He spun together with other strings. To the extent that even if each string is not just one strand, rather it's spun together from 8 strands, he's calling it kafel shmoina, and this is our minhag. And if you undo the tzitzis, you'll notice you have 8 strings inside that are spun together, and that is our minhag. As long as it becomes one string afterwards, it's considered one chut, and you're good. Halacha yud alf. These chutin, you have to prepare them lishma, and therefore, bein lavan bein tcheles, regardless if we're talking about the mitzvah of lavan or the mitzvah of tcheles, tzrichim tviyah, they need to be spun l'shem tzitzis, with the intent that this is going to be made as the mitzvah of tzitzis. There's certain wool that you would think you want to use for tzitzis if it's derogatory to the mitzvah because of the place where it came from on the animal. For example, when the sheep they graze, or when they're just laying around in the field, there's the bottom, the wool that's close to the bottom is just sitting in dirt that's very thick and disgusting, or it gets caught in thorns. You can't use that for it. Neither could you if it was walking on a fence and chunks of wool got cut off. That's shirayin. You can't use that, take it off the fence and make out of it. And not that the weaver leaves at the end of the loom, for example. He has a whole bunch of what he didn't finish spinning. You gather that all and you turn it into a beged. It's not respectful. Either from a good selected portion of either wool or flax, which turns into linen. One is not allowed to use stolen wool, which is it's a mitzvah babavera, which is aser ba'ana, which is not for you to appreciate. Kachim was consecrated. Also apostle. Now it's invalid. Now if a person bowed to a behema, tzamer apostle tzitzis, it's tzamer's apostle tzitzis. And even though it's not tachlis, once you take it off, it could be mishtana, but it's already despised by the Eibshter. If a person bowed to flax when it was growing, and then afterwards they took it out and they changed its home host, and now it became linen, it's a different metzias, and it is kosher. It's not recognizable. Halacha yud beit. Tzitzis also is a kusi. We can't rely on his kavana and pasal. Never dabel b'nei Yisrael v'aslam tzitzis. Dafka yid could do it. Avolim also is Yisrael b'loy kavana. If a yid did it and he didn't have the proper intent, then it's kosher. But tzitzis shenasim in a asui mikoydem pasal. Now we're soon going to describe how you have tzitzis that we're going to consider it retroactively became tzitzis. Initially it was not tzitzis, and you did it proper, but it was not yet considered tzitzis until you did something afterwards that turned it into tzitzis. That isn't valid because you have to make it as tzitzis. Keita. Now he's going to bring an example. Hevi kanov sheyesh bo tzitzis utvar ala beged. Person came, brought a corner of a beged, just this corner, small piece of cloth, tied on tzitzis, and then he takes that corner and sews it on to this beged. Now you have a beged with one corner that now ended up having tzitzis, but it wasn't sewn on to a beged that was chayiv b'tzitzis. It was just a little corner, a little piece of cloth. Doesn't work. Okay. Utfar al beged afilu yesh bo is a kind of amal apostle. The Rambam holds, it's not, other poskim disagree, and Halach L'maisa poskim are makabel this, but the Rambam is machmer. He says, even if the initial piece that you sewed the tzitzis onto, or you tied the tzitzis onto, was an amal, it had that the side of a cubit on a cubit, which means it itself was chayiv tzitzis. But tachlis, that's not the beged you were intending to use. You now are sewing it onto a different beged. That's also invalid according to Rambam. You have to make it as tzitzis and not sew on what was already made as tzitzis. It's as if the tzitzis was made on its own retroactively. One is allowed to undo tzitzis and retie them. The fact that they're already called tzitzis doesn't ask it to be used again. Doesn't need to turn it into tzitzis when you tie it on, but you have to undo it, unravel it, and let the whole thing take them all out, and then you could tie it on. Now, halach yadal on a new bag. Tola chutin ben shnei knafayim mizu lezu. Okay, this is the next creativity. Okay, person went, and this is another example for how you make it retroactively tzitzis. He took a beged and he sewed on one strand that tzitzis here and one strand tzitzis here, and then cut it into two. So now, after it's cut, you have two pairs of tzitzis. Basically, you have if there was strings here and strings here, and you cut it in the middle, so now you have two begadim. Now you have one on this side, you put one on this side, but initially they were sewed wrong. When you tied it on, it wasn't tzitzis, it wasn't on the corner. So no, says Tala chutin bein shnei knafayim. If he sewed the tzitzis, he tied the tzitzis on between both corners, mizu lezu, from one end to the other. And he went, and even he did this, the other farther ends kilchasa. He cut this cloth in the middle between both that he sewed. These two tzitzis, when they were sewn on, they were sewed on bepsul. These two corners that now they're two separate corners, then they were woven together. They were one piece. Okay, so now that they're two conifers and then they have on them tzitzis, is retroactively done. Only when you cut it, it became two. So you're making tzitzis from something that was already done. Now, hitel tzitzis al hatzitzis. Interesting case. Okay, here he had tzitzis and it's getting dark and he wants it to be nice tzitzis. Maybe it's still kosher even. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to tie new tzitzis from these holes, and then afterwards, once I see it came out nice, then I'll cut off the other ones. Between me and you, you're not supposed to cut it with a knife. You're supposed to do it with your teeth. But actually, he put on the new tzitzis while the old one was still hanging, so it was not necessary, seemingly. And then l'chura, it seems like tasav loyman also what you made wasn't tzitzis. In this case, it is valid. Zakter, it depends how, but im niskavan lebatal sarishonis. If your intention was to take off the first ones, so afterwards you take off the first one and it's kosher. If your intention was to keep them, it means to keep both of them, then it wasn't l'shem the mitzvah of tzitzis, because the mitzvah of tzitzis is not that way. You passed everything. And when you decided to cut off the additional bal toisif tzitzis, then nimtza ashar, retroactively the one that was in limbo, but it was really puzzle before, now it became kosher. So you messed it up. So here it depends on your intent. That's a halacha l'maisa poskim are makel in that type of case. Anyways, hamatal balas sholish. If someone put tzitzis on a beged that only had 3 corners. The fourth corner was round. And then put onto the fourth one, he put tzitzis. Then all 4 are puzzle according to the Rambam. Because when you put the first 3, the beged was not a beged. It wasn't chayiv tzitzis. Also, you made it chayiv after you already sewed on. You tied on 3. I think the Ramon, the Alter Rebbe, they're mated the fourth corner. That corner was done with kashos, and then the other 3 have to take off and put back on the shem tzitzis. Halach Yud Zayin, ein koivlin zatalis l'shnayim. One should not fold a talis. Right, it's supposed to be 4. Has to have 4 kanfis. So he folds it into 2, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to put tzitzis off this corner and off this corner, and then obviously the bottom also." Because it still could separate and be 2, and these are going to be the tzitzis is coming off in the middle. So the Rambam is going to say you have to close at least one side, either this side or the bottom. Close it, and then once that's done, then you could do on the 4 corners. So where are we? Only if you sewed one entire side. Final halach for today. Nifsak hakanaf sheyesh bo tzitzis chutz l'shalosh etzbos. If the kanaf, the entire corner, started ripping off the general beged, outside of the 3 etzbos, the kitzur, the tzitzis is hanging now that way. It's hanging off. So Dr. Rambam, toifra b'mkoima, you could sew it where it ripped off. It's still considered connected to the beged. Besoich shalosh, if it's within 3, then lo yitfer. You have to leave that corner is a problem, right? Nismata zavis shel beged shebein chutei hatzitz bein seifa arug. What happens if it started ripping, but not on top of the tzitzis, on top of where the tzitzis are hanging off? It didn't rip over here. Rather, it started ripping from the bottom, and now the tzitzis that you once took off the kesher gadol from the end, and it was far away in the middle. Let's do it on my tzitzis. Maybe that's better. Okay, the tzitzis that were once upon a time 3 etzbais away from the corner now became much closer because the bottom ripped off and came up. The bottom came up until here. So the Rambam. As long as you have even a drop that still seals it onto the beged and holds the strings. Let's say it went all the way back to here, and there's just pushed a little bit holding it back on. Sorry, it's still kasha. And then you should add. You could cut it and slide it higher and then close it. You can make it even better, but it's still kasha. It's not called tasalon. If the strings themselves were shortened, even if they ripped all the way to the top, and they're only left with the amount needed to tie a small knot, it's still going to be kosher. But once the string ripped off all the way back to its source, to the knot, even if it's 1 chut, then it's puzzle. We know chut echad means 1 entire chut, so it's really, as the halach l'maisa indicates, if you know that it's 2 different chutin, then it's not considered 1 chut was nifsak kol yikore. So only if 2 reach the top, and it's the same side, same string. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope it was clear, quite technical. And it's a pleasure to go through Kol HaTorah Kula with the Rambam, and I lead 1 perek a day, the entire Torah Shabbat Pesach Koyach to our tech team led by Rabbi Levi Nimrovsky. Have a wonderful evening.